All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, how happy of you to have rugby league back on our TV? We had heaps to watch over the weekend.
We did almost too much. I mean, if you tried to keep ahead of all the TV coverage the game had over the weekend, including the Australian game and the all the pre-season challenge games and the All-Stars game, as well as the 6 Super League games. Of course, if you wanted to watch Castleford Wigan, you could watch it twice on Sky and on the BBC. So you'd be watching rugby league to the middle of next week, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Just to watch round that first weekend.
Absolutely, it almost might be worth recording some of those matches and then having one to watch every single night leading into next round, and then doing that for the rest of the season.
Or maybe storing them up for the close season when there's no rugby league. Who knows? But I mean, I'm well behind the 8 ball in terms of seeing all the games, but there was some drama, wasn't there, in the ones that we did see? And of course, there are two main talking points really. One is the crowds that turned out, 76,000 and odd, which is a great figure, an average crowd of more than around 12,500, which is a record number. That's great to see, and it reflects the sort of interest that there's been in the game. In the build-up to the new season. But of course, the second talking point, not quite so positive, I suppose, is the 4 red cards and numerous yellow cards. I think, how many yellow cards was it? 9, I think, altogether. Yeah, 9 yellow cards, which meant that quite a few of those games were being played with teams that were not, didn't have 13 men on the pitch. So inevitably, there was some impact on the outcome of those games, some more than others, of course.
No, absolutely. And as we mentioned, there was a lot of rugby league to get through. I've done my best to try and watch the highlights of the matches that I wasn't able to watch. But we'll kick off with the first matchup, the Hull Derby. Hull KR 22 defeated FC 0.
Well, this is the one that I'd been really looking forward to, but Hull FC let us down really a bit. I mean, it was. It's funny how often the season starts and the rains come, and of course it was heavy rain for that game, as it was for Castleford v Wigan a couple of nights later. But Hull, you always think that they're going to revive and start playing better. But I think they were the most disappointing team of the whole weekend. I mean, last year Hull KR beat them 40 points to 0 on Good Friday at the MKM Stadium, and we all said, let's hope it's not that one-sided. Well, it very nearly was, actually, because Hull KR scored 5 tries, but because they didn't really have a goal kicker, they only had 1 out of 5 conversions. But it was an incredibly disappointing night for Hull fans, particularly when you watched their overseas recruitment players who, almost uniformly had a bad night. Franklin Pele being sent off for a crazy, attack on an opponent. We're talking now on Tuesday morning. He's up for the tribunal tonight to try and explain what got into him to make him do that. And of course, then, the other overseas stars, none of them really shone, and most of them were really quite ineffective. Herman Essayesi, he got sin bin, but has now been suspended for, I think it's 2 matches for head contact. So he and Pele are both going to be out of the side pretty certainly for this Friday's trip to Warrington. And it means that Tony Smith, the Hull coach, is going to have to play some of his younger British-based stars, and I think that probably is good for them, to be perfectly honest. I think they, need to. I mean, Pele and SAS need to sit down and think again about what they did on Thursday, because if they're going to play like that, they'll be suspended for quite a lot of the season, I think, if as the season goes on.
I think the only positive thing to come out of those cards is, it's in the first round of the season. If you're going to learn from a mistake, it's best to do it at the start of the season.
Absolutely.
The Pele one was just a brain explosion for me. It was a beautiful
crazy
hit to start with, but the follow through with the swinging arm was just uncalled for.
Just madness, wasn't it, really? And very, very disappointing, for everybody connected with the Hull FC club. It really just was ridiculous, to be perfectly honest. And Herman Esse was lucky not to get a red card as well, and the fact that he's got a 2-game suspension, given by the match review panel, sort of emphasises that point, doesn't it? So they clearly need to, work out in training this week what to, how to make legal tackles, basically, and quite frankly, those incidents were incidents that would have been dealt with in the same way last year, as well as this year. So I don't think there's any real excuse for them, to be honest, at all.
That's right. And, I love aggressive players, but it's about having that controlled aggression. We've seen stars like Jared Warrior-Hargraves back in the NRL. He's frequently sort of been sent to the sin bin over his career, and I don't know if it's something that will come with maturity, but if he can learn to sort of get a grip on his aggression.
He is being linked with Hull KR, by the way, isn't he, at the moment?
Yeah, Warrior-Hargraves has been, that's for sure.
So, from next year, so...
He might want to have a good hard think about the rules over here before he makes the move over, because if he thinks he's getting sin bin heaps in Australia...
He may well, yeah.
It's... it'd be interesting to see the fallout from the Pele tackle and what he's sort of given. Absolutely. Should find out those results tonight, shouldn't we?
Yeah. But I thought there were a lot of promising things for Hull KR, obviously, apart from the goal kicking. We had Mikey Lewis and Tyrone May combining reasonably well at half back in the first game that those two played, and I think Hull KR have got a lot of promise, and of course they play Leeds this Thursday. That's going to be a hell of a game, I think. And but Hull FC getting 20,000 people there, and then disappointing the vast majority of them was really a setback for them. And I hope that they can recover from it pretty soon, and beginning this Friday at Warrington.
Absolutely. And I'm sure Willie Peters won't be happy with the number of mistakes and drop ball he saw. We did mention it was quite wet on Thursday night, but I think it's a bit of a theme for most teams over the first weekend. There's a lot to improve on.
Yeah, there is, but nonetheless, it was an exciting weekend, I think. Having said all that, for Super League, and there were some great tries scored and great incidents, and the red cards and yellow cards did add to the drama, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll see what happens in round two, and who's learnt the most from round one.
Did you manage to catch a glimpse of some of the stuff they were doing pre-game in terms of the two Hull sides walking out and all the lights flashing on and off?
Yes, I mean a lot of clubs are doing a light show now before the game starts, and that's really interesting to see, isn't it? And but at the end of the day, what the fans want is to see their teams play well. The light shows are great, and it's great to have bands performing before the game and all that sort of stuff. It marvellous to see. It certainly helps build up an atmosphere. But at the end of the day, fans are pretty one-eyed when it comes to their team's performance.
Yeah,
and the Hull fans won't be happy this week unless and until they go to Warrington and give a vastly different sort of performance.
No, absolutely. In the next sort of matchup we'll look at here, Leeds 22 defeated Salford 16. I think this match was a lot closer than what a lot of people were expecting.
Well, everybody always writes Salford off, don't they? And, every year Salford have lost some of their key players, Brodie Croft and Andy Ackers in this case, and we were all told that they were lambs to the slaughter going to Headingley, and that Croft and Ackers would shine against their old team. Well, Brodie Croft was actually pretty quiet, and I thought Salford were quite heavily penalised. Actually, I thought, I'm not saying they were unfairly penalised, but they they just didn't quite seem to get the run of the play. quite honestly. The penalty count was 11-7 in favour of Leeds. It seemed more than that to me, and they gave away a lot of set restarts as well. But I thought Salford played extremely well. Of course, Ash Handley scored the try of the weekend for Leeds, and that was absolutely brilliant. That try, I'm sure, has gone viral because it was just... Ash Handley is a great winger, in my view, and he showed tremendous pace, great intelligence in the way he lined up the defensive players and wrong-footed them and then went round them and got to the line. It was a length of the field effort, effectively. So, great for them. And it was really vital for Leeds, I think, that Leeds did win that game. But it was good to see that it was such a close one. And they were, the outcome was uncertain right until the end of the game.
Absolutely.
And that was brilliant. I thought the interesting thing, or one interesting thing about that game, was that Ian MacDonald was coming back to Headingley after having left in slightly odd circumstances last year when he left before the end of the season to go home for personal reasons, but then never came back. And the crowd, of course, booed him every time he got the ball, and that just seemed to make him play that much better. I thought he was absolutely outstanding. We've got a readers' poll this week, by the way, in which we ask our readers about 6 players who all made their debuts, which player made the most impressive debut, and we've picked out Ian MacDonald as one of those who's in that list, and I think he absolutely deserves to be there, and was great and took an awful lot of handling, and certainly those Leeds fans in the South Stand who booed him such a lot, by the end of the game they must have been thinking, crikey, we, despite the fact that he had to go home last year, we wish we'd kept him, because he would have been he would have shone in that Leeds team, and the result might have been a bit more decisive if he'd been playing for Leeds and not Salford.
No, absolutely. That's the thing. Sometimes when you build a player, it just fuels them. And,
of course it does.
I'm sure they might be regretting the boos now. And as you mentioned, Ash Handley, what a try! Like, I love when you see an outside back just back themselves. Well,
that's what the games. That's what the fans love to see most. With great respect to all the hard-working forwards in the middle of the field, grinding out metres or yards. The crowd really wants to see a try like the one that Ash Handley scored. And if we could guarantee one of those in every game, we'd have no trouble filling the grounds, would we really?
No, absolutely.
Brilliant.
And another match we had was Saints 40 defeating London 4. I think we all sort of predicted a big scoreline, but I think London played quite well considering.
Yes, I think London certainly didn't disgrace themselves, and they had some good players. I was very impressed by Oliver Leyland at full-back for the Broncos, and Emmanuel Wayne came on from the bench, and he played very well. Another PNG player. We've got loads of PNG players in Super League at the moment, and he's another one who's going to be quite a handful to tackle this year. And but Saints inevitably ran away with it a bit in the end. Matt Whitley scoring 2 tries for them, another excellent debut from him, and of course Darryl Clark, the man who was inheriting the number 9 shirt from James Roby. I thought he had an outstanding game for St Helens, and again he's on the list of debutants who made the best debut at the weekend, and I thought he was really brilliant. Was Darryl, and a lot of people wondered whether he was the right signing for St Helens to replace James Roby, but on Friday night's evidence, admittedly against perhaps the weakest team in the competition, it looks as though he is. There was one thing notable about this game as well, and that is there were no red or yellow cards.
Yeah.
That's the only game in which there were no red or yellow cards. So, that's one of note, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about Darryl Clark is I got a chance to talk to him at their media day before the season started, and you could just tell the way he was sort of walking around the room, there was a bit of energy about him. He looked like he was excited to get out there and just rip in. And
absolutely,
I think that the fresh start with the Saints has done him a world of good. And,
I'm sure.
What a replacement for Roby. In the other match of that night, was it Wigan 34 defeated Castle? Was that the next day?
That was Saturday. No, the other one was Huddersfield defeating Lee.
That's right. We'll go into that match there. The scoreline, I don't know if I've jotted this one down.
16-8.
Now, I think people were tipping this game to be potentially the match of the round before the round started. For me, watching it was a little bit of a disappointment. I wish I probably had watched the Leeds Salford match.
Well, the Leeds Salford game was probably a better, more appealing game, I think. I mean, the headline says it all, doesn't it, in League Express? Giants grind their way to victory. And it was a grind, to be perfectly honest. But having said that, Ian Watson will be absolutely delighted, and he won't apologise for grinding their way to victory, because if you can get a victory by grinding the opposition down, then you'll take it, or certainly he will. And I thought it was a really fine performance by the Giants, actually. Although it certainly wasn't. It wasn't it wasn't a spectacular win, obviously, but it was just what they needed. Because Lee, obviously, it's funny, Lee had a great pre-season. They had that great win against Warrington in pre-season, and they looked as though they were steaming into the new season with all guns blazing. But Huddersfield contained them, and Matt Moylan, their new signing, playing at standoff alongside Lachlan Lamb. I think that partnership needs a bit of time to develop, because it didn't strike me as obvious about who was the man in charge in that partnership. And Matt Moylan obviously is a really big name player. He put in a wonderful grubber for the try by Josh Charnley. But then subsequent to that, he actually, his kicking game near the opposition try line left quite a bit to be desired, really, Jake, and he wasn't anything like as good as he had been earlier in creating the try for Charnley. Having said that, I'm sure that Lee will come back into it, and obviously the other thing about that game, by the way, for Lee, was that they did lose Edwin Ipapi fairly early on to an injury, and that clearly disrupted them. I think he's plays such a vital role in a dummy half for them, and when he's no longer there, the players had to take that role. So, if I were Lee fans, I wouldn't despair, and it was great to see the ground looking pretty full, 8,500 people there. Lee are very keen to average more than 7,500 this year to get those extra points in the grading system, and I'm sure they'll do it. But maybe they've just got to wait a bit longer for their first win. They won't be playing this weekend, because they would have been playing Wigan in round 2, but Wigan are in the World Club Challenge, so they have a rest this weekend, and they can regroup and come back the following week.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing, like with Matt Moylan, I think what Adrian Lamb needs to do is just sort of get him and Lockie in a room together and just say, hey, Matt, I want you to play the same way you played alongside Nico Hines when you were playing at the Sharks. That's when you played your best football.
Yeah.
And then just give the keys to the team to Lachlan Lamb to steer him around the park.
Absolutely, yes.
But yeah, it's going to take potentially 5 to 10 matches for that partnership to really start.
When you sign a spine player, there's always a settling in period, isn't there? It's unlike in some other positions where the role of the middle forwards is probably more consistent from team to team. But the spine players, they need to, create that sort of understanding between each other. And I don't think Lee have yet done that, so we'll see how that works out. It
was interesting listening to the commentary sort of towards the end of that match. The commentators were discussing who they thought their player of the match was. Jack Murchie was the recipient of that award at the end. I thought he played really well in the back row for Huddersfield.
Yes.
And quite an impressive debut as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, he's another one who's in this list. I keep talking about this list of debutants, but he's another one. But the other thing that affected Lee as well, of course, was the two sin binnings, John Asiata after 33 minutes and Ricky Lutelli on 44 minutes, which certainly hampered them in getting back into the game. But, good for Huddersfield. It's it's a great win for them, and they play St Helens next on Saturday at home. So that's going to be, we'll see whether they really have turned the corner.
Quite a challenge, that's for sure. And like you said, it doesn't have to be pretty as long as you get the 2 points. That's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in the next matchup, we had Wigan 32 defeated Cas 4. I thought Castleford were quite good in this match.
They were until they had Liam Watts sent off, weren't they?
And that was just after half time, or just
no?
Before
it was before half time.
Yeah.
It's after about 27 minutes, I think, if I remember rightly.
So, yeah.
And the funny thing was that prior to that, Wigan had Harry Smith's sin bin for a tip tackle on Luke Hooley, the full back. And that tip tackle, I actually wrote a piece in League Express this week, and I must admit that I had anticipated Harry Smith being suspended for that tackle. I thought I thought it was potentially a red card. There was some suggestion that the video referee had suggested a red card, and the referee went for a yellow one. I don't know how true that is, actually, but so that was quite controversial. But then Liam Watts got sent off in the 29th minute, at which stage the teams were level, weren't they? And then after that, Wigan ran away with it. But it was obviously a controversial dismissal. It was he and Joe Westerman sort of sandwiched Tyler Dupree, and Liam's shoulder hit Dupree in the head. I think on the basis of the current rules, that was a fair send-off, personally. Although it was very interesting to see Craig Lingard's... You didn't need to be much of a lip reader to understand what Craig Lingard said or thought about it, which we better not repeat it here. No. But, he clearly was very irritated by it. And... I mean, Joe Westerman also seemed to make contact with Tyler Dupree's head, but Westerman hasn't been cited by the match review panel. But Liam Watts is going to be facing the tribunal tonight as we speak. So we'll see what penalty he gets. It's a grade E head contact, which grade E or grade F is always a matter for a reference to the Rugby League tribunal, so he will be there this evening, and there are a couple of other players who will also be at the tribunal this evening. We're speaking too early to be able to confirm what the penalty is, but Franklin Pele is one, and who's the other? Oh, Michael McIlorum. We've not discussed this Catalans Warrington game yet, but he was sent off, for again an attack to the head, really.
Yeah. It's interesting how frequently, I think you and I spoke about before the podcast, this red card is being used in the first round. I think you mentioned that last year in the NRL alone there was only 4 send-offs for the whole season, and we've seen, is it 4 or 5?
We've seen 4 red cards, 4 red cards and 9 yellow ones. Yeah, I mean... that will settle down. It's amazing how often there is a spate of red cards early in the season, but it does tend to, settle down as the season unfolds. So let's hope it does, because we don't want to see too many games where you've got 12 against 13. Although, funnily enough, the next game we were going to talk about, I suppose, is Catalans and Warrington. Yep. And in that game, Mickey McIlorum got sent off right at the start of the second half, when the score was 6-4 to Catalans, and they then scored 10 points without him and won the game 16-10. And again, that was a really good game to watch, and it was Sam Burgess's first game in charge, of course, as the Warrington coach. And afterwards, he said that he wasn't too unhappy with what had unfolded in front of him, because I think the Wolves played with great spirit, actually, and could have won the game, if the bounce of the ball had gone their way. So, I think that's a very promising start for Warrington. Obviously, good for Catalans, because to win that game with 12 men, crikey, that's a very strong performance, and they go to London for their next game on Friday night, which they'd be obviously confident of winning. So a good start for them, and not a bad one for Warrington.
And I particularly enjoyed the Catalans' performance, considering how many players they lost last year as well, and key players as well. Obviously, we mentioned Tyrone May, Mitch Pearce, Sam Tompkins, Adam Kearnan. These are all players who played, a crucial role in their grand final campaign last season, and to come out and win with 12 men on the field.
Absolutely. They started with a halfback combination of Jordan Abdul and Theo Farge, and Jayden Nikarima then came on later in the game off the bench and looked very nippy, I thought. Really played well, in my view. And Jordan Abdul looked to be a very useful addition. I mean, Jordan Abdul's got such a great kicking game. I mean, people say he left Hull KR because the Hull KR coach was not very impressed with his pre-season approach to training, which may well be true. But there are some players who probably don't need as much pre-season training as others when it boils down to it. And Jordan Abdul, who tends to carry a bit of weight sometimes, or looks as though he does, but my goodness, he's a very clever player, very intelligent, very smart player, and is a player I'd be very happy to have in my side, even if he didn't win all the pre-season competitions for aerobic fitness and all that sort of stuff. That which is important, but nonetheless, you want players who are smart enough to guide a team around the field, and I think he is.
That's one thing you can't measure in the pre-season. It's your football IQ and your heart. How much heart do you have when you're out there on the field?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think he had a really good performance. Let's talk about the Tarek Sims hit of the week. What did you think of that? Poor old George Williams. He'll be checking his ribs for the next few days.
George. Well, first of all, credit to George Williams, because it was a massive hit. Again, it's gone viral, but George Williams just stood up straight away and didn't make anything of it, and clearly, didn't look as though. Well, I mean, he got up as though he'd not felt it. I'm sure that's not true.
Yeah.
But clearly, he didn't try and make anything of it, and it was a perfectly legal tackle. In fact, it was a sort of tackle that players are supposed to make. Under these new regulations, it was certainly below the armpits. It was right in the middle of the torso, and fabulous. And if Tarek Sims can pull those sort of tackles off as the season goes on, plenty of players will be looking to try and sidestep him or avoid him altogether. I certainly would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. It's the perfect way to legally smash someone in today's game.
It certainly is. Yeah, fabulous.
So, yes,
absolutely fabulous.
Was a great weekend of football. Did you get to watch any of the Indigenous All-Stars match in Australia?
I've not watched that game yet. No. I've been too busy trying to catch up with Super League games. But again, the Indigenous team were the winners, weren't they? And it's funny, isn't it? It was apparently played in pouring rain in North Queensland. The rain. It seems to have been raining all over the rugby league world this weekend, doesn't it?
No, it's quite bizarre, especially for somewhere like North Queensland in the summer. But I don't think I'd like to be playing in Townsville in the month of February.
No, I bet you wouldn't.
Coming out of summer, it's bloody hot up there.
No.
But yeah, let's get into some of the talking points from the weekend. Obviously, we've touched a lot on the card dilemma. I think we've spoken about. We expect that to sort of calm down in the coming weeks.
Yes. The other thing to talk about, Jake, is probably the TV coverage, isn't it? Because we had Sky focusing on two games, the Hull derby and the Leeds Salford game, with a proper build-up. But the other four games that they showed, only had a 5-minute build-up and didn't have the presenters at the ground. On the other hand, the BBC. They showed the Castleford versus Wigan game at the same time that Sky showed it, and they did have a build-up, a half-hour build-up, and it was historic, really, because it's the first Super League game that's ever been shown fully on the BBC, and it certainly had its plus and negative points. It's interesting to compare the, I've looked at both the BBC's coverage of that game and Sky's. First of all, the disappointing thing about the BBC, in my view, was that they started with that same sort of cartoon characters climbing the sort of mountain. They'd not updated that. Maybe that was because the deal was only agreed relatively recently, and they didn't have time to prepare a more interesting introduction to the show. But I hope they do that, because it needs something different. But the good thing about the BBC's, I mean, you had Matt Newsom and Robbie Hunter-Paul as the commentary pair on the BBC, and Dave Woods and John Wells were commentating on Sky. And if it's a contest, I thought Dave Woods and John Wells were better. John Wells is a really good summariser, in my view. He speaks very clearly, very sort of analytically about the game, and really gives the impression that he understands it. He's very, very thoughtful, and really, I think he's the best co-commentator in the game, if I'm really honest about it. But on the other hand, the BBC scored heavily with the pundits who were there both before the game and at half time. That was Ash Golding and Kevin Brown, and I thought both of those guys talked very, very well, both before the game and at half time, about the incidents, particularly the sending off and yellow card incidents and so on. And Sky didn't have separate pundits at half time, so that was very much a one-up for the BBC. So, there are positives and negatives for both, but it was very, very interesting to contrast the two approaches to the game, I thought.
No, absolutely. And it's always nice to see, a bit more money and things invested in the pre-match, post-match stuff. But what I will say, I did see at the train station this morning, at Manchester Victoria Station, there's a few Super League commercials being shown up around the station.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So I think the visibility of the league is also improving with the new broadcasting deals.
Absolutely,
too, which
yes.
is great to see.
Well, I hope you weren't the only one who saw them.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, just touching on what we spoke about last week when Ryan Brearley made those comments about people not knowing who Salford were out at the Trafford Centre. So the more exposure we can create, the more we can put the game in people's faces, I think it's only going to be a benefit in the long run.
Absolutely. And I think our clubs need a stronger identity, really. The competition needs a stronger identity, and the clubs themselves need a stronger identity. For example, we've talked about Huddersfield Giants, who I've always thought have got the best, potentially one of the best colour combinations, claret and gold. Two very positive colours. I've talked about this to Huddersfield supporters. And it was interesting to see them playing Lee on Friday in a rather inconspicuous, somewhat drab greyish-green sort of shirt with not a hint of claret and gold. Why do clubs go away from their traditional colours? I'll never understand that. And all the Huddersfield fans who were in the stadium were all wearing the claret and gold scarves and jerseys and so on, reflecting their home kit. So clubs tend to say they want a home kit and then an away kit, but why choose an away kit that has no clear link to the identity of the club? I just can't understand that at all. And if somebody can explain it to me, I'd be really grateful. I know they want to sell these kits, but they'd sell far more of them if they had, even if they had a grey kit sprinkled with claret and gold. It would be a lot better, wouldn't it?
I'd questioned myself a few times, like, wait a minute, is this Huddersfield?
Yes.
Just in my brain,
yeah, who
I
are
didn't
they?
know.
Yeah. So they get a great win and nobody knows who they are.
Yeah,
Isn't
that's
that
right.
Ridiculous.
Now, just on the crowd attendance we saw over the weekend, obviously it was great figures all round. Do you think that the card controversy might impact people's attendances next week or this weekend?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, that's not the prime motivating factor for people when they go to big games. I mean, it's interesting that the crowd figures were helped by the fixture list, weren't they? Because most of the big clubs were at home. You got Wigan. Wigan weren't at home actually, but St Helens and Leeds. Obviously, the whole derby attracted 20,000. This week there'll be clubs with probably a lower level of attendance being at home. You've got you've got Salford at home on Sunday. You've got London Broncos at home on Friday night against Catalans. Well, that's, I'd love nothing more than to see a full house there, but that's very unlikely. And you've got Huddersfield at home to St Helens on Saturday. Again, I'd love to see a really big crowd there, but Huddersfield's record doesn't sort of suggest that there'll be a massive one. So I think what the fans are looking for is excitement, and I think there is a high degree of excitement around the competition this year, and the occasional surprising result like Huddersfield's at Lee tends to add to the attraction, and I think there'll be big crowds this week at Warrington on Friday and at Hull KR on Thursday, and those are the TV games, aren't they, on Sky? So I think that's going to be really positive, and we'll see hopefully pretty packed grounds for those two games on Sky.
No, absolutely, and some of the car drama. It's a sign of things to come for next year. It's almost like warming up the players in terms of this is what's going to come next year with the tackle height changes. Yeah. Which leads me to my next point. I read an interesting article this week that Alex Walmsley wrote for the Yorkshire Live website. Now he's come out and written an article basically calling for there to be a players' union similar to the RLPA in Australia.
Yes,
he said because the issue is these tackle changes are coming in next season without much consultation with the players.
Absolutely,
he made reference to points that. Something like this would never be passed in the NRL without consultation with RLPA. So he said, as we move forward into this new Super League era, I guess going forward with all the broadcasting and the games being, put on for people to watch, he said that there needs to be a strong players' union. And I don't know whether the players need to drive that or if
there is a Rugby League Players Association, which is part of the GMB union, but it doesn't seem to be very strong, unfortunately. It's certainly nothing like the Players Association in the NRL, which clearly has teeth, lots of power, and can make the NRL sit down and negotiate with it. I agree. I think there ought to be a strong players' union in this country for a whole host of reasons, and but there have been attempts in the past to create new players' unions, and they've all fallen by the wayside, basically because they don't get the funding. I mean, the Players Association in Australia is funded by the game, isn't it? It gets a guaranteed income from the NRL itself, and a Rugby League Players Association in this country has never achieved anything like that. So until it does. I don't think we're going to see one, quite frankly.
Yeah, and it might be something that, 10, 20 years' time, it might be a valid sort of option, but at the moment...
Alex is not the only person who's called for one, by the way. Adam Clune, who's just come over to play for Huddersfield from a career in the NRL, he's also called for a players' union over here in the last few weeks. So, there is a growing sort of... sentiment, but who's going to do it? That's the point. Who's going to take on that mantle of being the key organizer, especially when it looks as though you're going to have to work for virtually nothing because there's no income coming in from anywhere to fund it.
Yeah, absolutely. And now looking forward to this weekend, obviously we've got a heap of Super League games, but we have to mention the World Club Challenge, obviously, that's going to be on this Saturday night out at Wigan.
Well, I'm very glad that Harry Smith is playing, but Wigan have suffered a blow with Luke Thompson being out of the game. Luke Thompson had to leave the field against Castleford and failed a head injury assessment, so he's out for 11 days, which means he won't be playing against Penrith. And it was funny, I didn't manage to see the incident that caused his discomfort. So, I'm not quite sure what happened there, because, of course, players wear reactive mouthguards now, don't they? And maybe something on that mouthguard gave the signal that he needed to come off the field. And it was fairly early in the game. I think on about 17 minutes he came off. So that's going to be a blow for Wigan. And it's going to be interesting to see the Wigan team. Obviously, Penrith have got no such worries because they've not had a game before the World Club Challenge itself, although they'll have a run out against Warrington this week. But it sort of illustrates the point for me that we ought to play the World Club Challenge before the Super League fixtures begin. So that, for example, Wigan are not, because Wigan could have had, Harry Smith suspended for this game if the worst had come to the worst, and that would have placed them at a very severe disadvantage. So, but let's hope. I mean, Harry Smith playing against Nathan Cleary, that's going to be really fascinating, isn't it? And I mean, that Harry faces a massive test against Nathan, and if he can play as well as he was doing last season, I think he'll hopefully steer the Wigan to victory, but it's going to be a tough test for them.
In your column this week, mate, you mentioned how you don't think that, I guess, offences in certain competitions should result in suspensions
being
right. Served in the World Club Challenge, for instance.
Yes, I think a suspension should be competition specific. So if you're sent off in a Super League game, you should be suspended for Super League games, which, of course, for the most part, you are. But when it comes to a one-off game like this World Club Challenge, even if Harry had been suspended from Super League, I don't think he should have been suspended from the World Club Challenge. But now that issue hasn't arisen anyway. But similarly, the Challenge Cup and the Super League as well. I think you just suspend them within competitions, but stick to the competitions in which the suspension is imposed.
Well, we saw it with George Williams last year with the Tonga series. He missed the first 2 games due to a suspension. So, yes, I agree. Now, apparently the Penrith Panthers have reached out to the RFL just to get clarification around the rules for the World Club Challenge, and it's almost been confirmed that it's going to be played under the international rules system, so there will be a few slight differences. But you and I were speaking on before the podcast. It's kind of hard to tell what the international rules are at the moment.
What are the rules? Yeah, you wonder, you despair, don't you? Sometimes, and actually, I think the NRL is at fault here because the NRL makes rule changes unilaterally, as we do, to be honest, and without reference to the international rules. For goodness' sake, sometimes the rules do need to be changed, but can't we do it centrally via the international rugby league body, so that everybody's playing, on the same page? And surely that's not too much to ask, is it?
No.
You wouldn't think so.
Yeah, it'll just be a matter of whether the officials can learn those new rules quick enough.
Absolutely.
But I'm sure they're more than capable of doing that.
Well, Liam Moore is refereeing the game, and I think he's an outstanding referee at the moment. And I really, he will handle it no matter what, I'm fairly sure.
No, I agree 100%. And I just hope that, he'll have to try and forget everything he's learned in the first week and, be a bit more lenient on the tackling height, I guess. But, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this match. If you had to predict the winner or the scoreline for this week, Martyn, who do you think?
Well, I'm still predicting Wigan to win, but obviously very tight. I'm predicting something like 18-16 as a scoreline.
So not a very high-scoring game, a tough, grinding sort of battle.
Well, 18-16 is fairly high-scoring, but we'll see. And obviously, I think Penrith will be probably more determined to win this game than they were last year against St Helens, when they were a little bit. I think they assumed that they were going to win against St Helens. And this year they've come over here. They've spent quite a bit of time at Manchester City's set up in East Manchester. I think they went to the Manchester City versus Chelsea game on Sunday or Saturday. I'm not quite sure which day it was, but so they've familiarised themselves with that as a training venue, and they'll be really up for it. There's no doubt about it. So. And you certainly, we saw, didn't we, in the grand final, you can't write Penrith off. Even if you're winning by 14 points with 10 minutes to go, don't write them off, whatever you do. And Nathan Cleary is just a genius, in my view.
Absolutely. And I think we touched on it last week, but he orchestrated that last comeback win without Jerome Luai by his side. So issue for him heading into this weekend without Luai.
No.
But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see. I can't wait to watch, mate. And yeah, it's going to be a great atmosphere at Wigan this weekend.
Yes.
Looking at some of the other matchups this weekend, I'll just quickly go through and get your picks. So Hull KR versus Leeds is the first match.
Well, you've got to go with Hull KR, but I think Leeds needed that first game, and I think they'll come on strong. So I think it's going to be a very tight game, but I'd go for Hull KR by about 6.
Yeah, absolutely. London versus Catalans?
We've got to go for Catalans by probably about, I think they'll win by 4 clear converted tries, so 24 points.
Yeah, absolutely. Wolves versus Hull FC?
Well, you've got to go with the Wolves, haven't you? And if they don't beat Hull, then it may be a crisis for Sam Burgess. I think Hull will win by 16 points.
Absolutely. The other thing I just want to touch on with Sam Burgess, I think I saw his interview with Jenna Brooks. He did a pretty long, in-depth chat with her, and he really played down his role this year, and I think he sort of made it sound like it's going to be a building process. Don't expect top of the table finish this season, but yes.
Do any fans not expect to be at the top of the table? Yeah. I mean, you always. I mean, the best rule for any coach. I mean, people always say to a coach, "What are your aims for this year?" Well, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one answer to that a coach ought to give, and that is, I want to win the next game.
Yep.
Because if you keep winning the next game, and the game after that, and the game after that, then you end up doing good things, don't you?
That's it.
That's the best answer you can give.
Yeah, you can't look too far in advance in this game. Things change too quickly. And then we've got the Giants taking on the Saints. That should be a good game.
I think the Saints will win by 10. I think the Saints... I mean, Giants obviously did well against Lee, but I think the Saints may just have a bit too much for them.
We saw that on the weekend. Like, some of the support play when there's line breaks made is just outstanding. Wellesby's always there in the frame when a line break is made.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yes. And then we've got Salford taking on Castleford.
I'm going to go for a shock here. I think Castleford might win this one. I thought Castleford's... Certainly in the first half against Wigan, I thought Castleford's offloading game was absolutely outstanding. They've got 1 or 2 players in their forward pack who I'm not that familiar with, but their offloading game looked great, and I've got a really high regard for Craig Lingard. So I think Salford are a bit of an up and down team. They often play better away than they do at home, and I think I'd stick my neck out and say that Cass could win by 6 points here.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. It should be a tight battle, and
should be. And I'd love to see Salford do well, because I'm so pleased that this stadium situation looks to be being resolved now with Salford, and I'm looking forward to their new signing. What's his name from West Tigers?
Oh, David
Noffa. It's a hard name to say. Yes, David Noffa Aluma. I really enjoy watching him play. I think he's a winger in the sort of Ken Seo style from last year. So hopefully he'll score a bag full of tries for Salford. But I don't think he'll be here for this game at the weekend. But I hope I may be wrong. Who knows?
And probably some a much needed recruit for them, or some more firepower out wide. And I think he's still got a few years of football left.
Oh yes, he's a very nippy player. Yeah.
Yes.
Fell out with Benji Marshall. I'm not quite sure why he did. I think that was something to do with pre-season training, wasn't it? That he's not the sort of guy you'd necessarily want to be lifting enormous weights. He's a bit more slenderly built than some of the forwards. But, great to see him in Super League. I'm looking forward to him coming.
And just one more thing on the Cass performance. I think that's how you should approach these big teams like the Saints and Wigan. Throw the ball around a little bit. Look for that offload. You've got to risk it.
Absolutely. Don't try and just compete sides in the middle and just have hit-ups. Try and stretch them. And, they did Cass. And if they'd not suffered Liam Watts being sent off, who knows what they might have achieved against Wigan. I don't think they'd have beaten them, but they might have got closer. Incidentally, there is one point that I've made before, probably on this podcast, about dismissals. I raised it when we spoke to Robert Hicks a few weeks ago, that we ought to think very carefully about whether, when a player gets dismissed, like Liam Watts did for Castleford against Wigan, whether we could say that such a dismissal reduces the team to 16 players, not 12 players. In other words, if you get a player dismissed, you could bring a player on from the bench to replace him, but the player dismissed can't come back on at all during the game. So you don't reduce one team to 12 players. You keep them at 13, which is obviously better for the supporters. That would be a good, a potential halfway house. Maybe not for all dismissals, who knows, but some of the more sort of technical ones, perhaps. Just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I wouldn't mind seeing is when there is a player who's red carded, I wouldn't mind seeing that reflected in their suspension. So in terms of not giving them necessarily, say, 6 weeks, if they've been red carded in the first half, that's a pretty harsh penalty in itself.
It is, yes.
I don't think you need to then go and give them a 6-week suspension. I feel like there should be a few weeks cut off.
Yeah, maybe
that total ban. But,
absolutely.
There's
always been that thing as well. If a player gets sent off for injuring an opponent, should that player be out for as long as the opponent is out?
Yeah,
true. That's another point, isn't it?
No, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how the games are officiated in the weeks going forward. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we wrap up today?
Well, no. I mean, just a quick one about the 1895 Cup. We've got the draw now for the last 8, and interesting to see that Oldham are the only League One club that's still in the running. They play against York Knights away on those games that will be played on the 3rd of March. And this weekend we've got the Challenge Cup coming up, the 4th round it is, with 2 games on Saturday and 6 on Sunday, including an all-amateur game between York Acorn and Woughbrow Hornets on Saturday, so that's an interesting one. And the Hammersmith Hills Hoists from London travel to Halifax also on Saturday, so that's fascinating, isn't it? And Wakefield Trinity play Hunslet ARLFC, the Hunslet Amateur Club, after having scored more than 100 against Newcastle Thunder at the weekend. So, that'll be an interesting experience for Hunslet, I'm fairly sure. But, it's all gearing up to the launch of the Championship and League One seasons in the month of March.
Yeah, and another weekend full of rugby league, even more games than
absolutely
last weekend. So
yeah,
God knows how we're going to fit it all in, but I'm sure we'll try our best.
Well, we shall see. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome, guys. And don't forget, if you do want to get a copy of the League Express paper this week, you can head online to totalrl.com/shop to get an online digital subscription.
Let me show you the front page. There's the front page of this week's issue. If you need to get into a newsagents to buy it, there it is. And I hope you enjoy the read. We've enjoyed putting it together. We've got an interesting paper, I think, from front page to back. Actually, one thing I didn't mention, or one thing we haven't mentioned, is we've had an interesting letter this week from Adam Fogarty, who's the ex-St Helens player, really complaining about the decision to rename the Harry Sunderland Trophy. Interestingly, Adam's father won the very first, his father Terry Fogarty, won the very first Harry Sunderland Trophy in 1965 when he was playing for Halifax. And Adam's complaint is not so much that they're changing the name on the trophy as much as the way that they're doing it. He thought, and I agree with him actually, that they should have paid far more respect to the history of the trophy and the players who have won it. I mean, it's been awarded 69 times so far, and they should have had a formal sort of handover ceremony, perhaps at this year's grand final, making it the last Harry Sunderland Trophy this year, and bringing some of the great players who have won the Harry Sunderland Trophy to the grand final to be there to sort of, put the Harry Sunderland Trophy to bed, so to speak, and, to welcome in the new Rob Burrow Award. And I think that would have been the way to do it, personally, rather than just announcing somewhat, rather suddenly, really, that they were just changing it with no obvious fanfare to accompany that change.
And I guess there is opportunity to do some sort of tribute at the grand final this year, but it won't necessarily be, the last Sunderland Trophy. It'll be the Robbie Burrow.
Yeah, it will. It'll be the first one this year. I mean, everybody loves Rob, don't they? And I think we all are delighted to see his name being attached to anything. you've got to you've got to respect your own history, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Don't forget, guys, I think we're nearly up to 600 subscribers on YouTube now, and that is steadily growing each week. So if you're watching us on YouTube at the moment, or if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, go onto YouTube and subscribe to us, because there's always...
Get your mates to subscribe as well.
Yeah.
Get everybody to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Parents, grandparents, cousins, get them all involved.
Keep watching. Yeah.
Absolutely, Martyn. All right, mate, we'll be back next week to do a full wrap of the World Club Challenge and the matches this weekend, so stay tuned for that, guys. But yeah, apart from that, thanks, Martyn.
Thanks, Jake. Oh, pleasure as always.
Absolutely, mate. And can't wait for this weekend.
No, neither can I. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.
Cheers.